Hello, this is 𝐬𝐩𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐿𝐼𝐻 Manucharyan, and you're listening to ANN Groong's July 26, 2020 edition of Week in Review. This week, Armenian news continued to be dominated by the fighting on the Tavush border and its aftermath, including violence between Armenian and Azeri demonstrators worldwide as they protested to support their respective points of view. Coincidentally, several weeks ago, Armenia updated its national security strategy document, so it's a good time to review it with input from two special guests to the show. This week, we saw the fighting in the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan simmer down and take a backseat to the political statements flowing in from around the world. In general, except for Turkey and a few other countries, we've seen balanced statements from major countries and organizations such as the US, the EU, the UN, Russia, and the CSTO. Major journalists such as David Ignatius called on the US and Russia to seize this moment as a rare opportunity to collaborate toward peace in the Caucasus. We discussed the state of affairs since the cessation of fighting, and what the replacement of Azerbaijan's longtime foreign minister portends for the future of negotiations with Armenia. Also, the drone wars, and what that means for the future of warfare in the region. Joining us today are Emil Sanamyan, who is a senior research fellow at USC's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus with a special focus on Azerbaijan. He is a regular contributor to ANN Groong. Karen Vertanesyan, editor of razm.info, a specialty website on military and warfare strategies with a focus on Armenia and its neighboring region. And Asbet Kochikyan, professor of political science and international relations at Bentley University in Massachusetts. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Emil, how do you assess these latest events and current cessation of fighting? What does the replacement of Azerbaijan's longtime foreign minister portend for the future? And what do you think Bayramov will be tasked with to achieve in the near term?
Hello again. In terms of the current hiatus, certainly there is some rebuilding is happening as far as both the foreign ministry and the military capacity in Azerbaijan. We knew from earlier this year that Azerbaijan was going to add on to its existing capacity in terms of bringing in Turkish, at least a squadron of Turkish UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, the ones that were used in Syria, to add it to its existing capacity of mostly Israeli UAVs. So I think this experience of recent fighting has accelerated that process. We had the delegation, and Razminfo covered it extensively. Delegation from Azerbaijan went to Turkey on as fighting was still ongoing in Tavush. And there's been reports of Turkish transportation planes landing in Baku, perhaps already bringing the UAVs. But of course, it takes time to be able to deploy them unless Turkish government is ready to lend Azerbaijan their own pilots who operate the UAVs and sort of integrate them into the Azerbaijani command. That's not, I wouldn't rule that possibility out. That's possible, but more likely they're going to train Azerbaijani side, and we heard that from Ismail Demir, the head of the Turkish defense industries, that they're going to be training Azerbaijani personnel, not just on new UAVs that they'll be supplying, but also on some of the other things. I think one thing that we saw in this fighting between July 12 and the extensive fighting was between July 12 and July 14 is that Azerbaijan was not ready for fighting in that particular area, in Tavush area. Of course, they have been building up this fleet of UAVs for some time. We knew from 2016 that they already had some capacity, and they've been expanding that capacity in the last several years. But I think, of course, the preparation was on their part done primarily in the Artsakh theater. So preparation means building up a target list of fixed targets that would be attacked, and also looking for moving targets to be attacked. In this case, of course, they did manage to attack some targets in Tavush, but at least by what they've published, we could also see them attack very random targets like just regular cars and regular buildings, and expending their UAVs, drones, and also missiles on things that may not be of the value that would normally this UAVs target. So they will be working to update their target lists, also in Tavush area and maybe other areas. And because, of course, you have to constantly upgrade those target lists, and of course, integrate the new capacity into their war planning. As far as the foreign ministry, I think it's there's probably going to be some rebuilding inside the foreign ministry. But the foreign ministry of Azerbaijan is a very peculiar agency. You have foreign ministers that sort of have changed, even though the latest one had changed after more than 16 years. But at least you have changes. But you have some deputy foreign ministers in Azerbaijan that have been in office since the early 90s. I'm thinking of Araz Azimov, for example. And then you have other deputy foreign ministers who are relatives of Ilham Aliyev. Either one is a cousin, the other one is the former husband of his sister, third one is another cousin, and the fourth one is the uncle of Mehriban Aliyev. So it's unlikely that the new minister will be replacing any of those deputy foreign ministers or like bringing his own team. So it's sort of a figurehead appointment. For now, it means that Azerbaijan does not really have a very serious kind of face as far as the foreign minister, and sort of de facto foreign minister is currently Hikmet Hajiev, who's the assistant to Ilham Aliyev and former spokesman of the foreign ministry. So there'll be some, I think, disarray happening there. I don't see immediate sort of change, because I think this appointment and generally this appointments by Ilham Aliyev, appointing somebody from kind of somebody unexpected, has been his hallmark. He's done that with other appointments, but especially this one, I don't think anybody really knew that he was going to appoint this particular person. I think that's his way of showing that he's in charge. He decides who becomes the foreign minister. He's not even going to consult anybody on that. So he picked this particular person that had not prior experience beyond some tangential experience as a lawyer and a member of U.S. Azerbaijani Chamber of Commerce, and obviously he speaks English, etc. So, and his primary connection to the ruling family is through Mikhail Jabarov, who is the sort of super economics minister, and before that was tax minister, and before that was education minister. So he's been everywhere, and he's believed to be a close friend of Ilham Aliyev's children, Leyla Aliyeva, Arzu Aliyeva, and also Mehriban Aliyeva. And this particular person is a childhood friend. Ceyhun Bayramov is a childhood friend of Mikhail Jabarov, and that's how he ended up first coming into the education ministry as Mikhail Jabarov's deputy, and then succeeding him as the education minister, and now moving on to the foreign ministry. But like I said, that it seems to me that there is going to be quite a bit of disarray in that apparatus, as there has been over the years. In terms of sort of, maybe reappointing new ambassadors, especially in the light of what Ilham Aliyev said about some ambassadors being traitors and whatnot. So that's a general picture.
I would like to add that yesterday's declaration by OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs, there is very interesting wording in the end of the text. It says the co-chairs are prepared to meet with the leaders or the designees at any time. What that word designee may mean, probably it's about Hikmet Hajiev replacing the foreign minister during the negotiations. I don't know, that's just a guess, but it may be so.
What do you make of the current relative peace and the political maneuvering since the cessation of hostilities in general?
First of all, I always mention that given the development of military infrastructure, both in Armenia and Azerbaijan, even a period of longer peace can become a full-scale war just in the matter of hours, maybe days. It's very easy to go to a full-scale war without any visible preparation, just in the matter of hours. So when lots of people are asking, like, how long is going to this peaceful period last? There is no definite answer now. I can say that there was a strong blow to internal reputation of Ilham Aliyev and Azerbaijani generals because of these Tavush fightings. And I'm sure they are going to try to take some revenge, at least something that can be shown to their population as a successful case of revenge. Let's remember what happened in 2014 when there was a sabotage war in August 2014. Which ended up by Azerbaijanis having much heavier casualties. But in like 2-3 months, they hit Armenian military helicopter, if you remember. So I think they will try to have some counter blows, to arrange some counter blows, when it is very hard to tell, really. The second question was?
Yeah, I think the second question was related. What do you think about the political maneuvering of both sides in the aftermath of the hostilities?
Okay. I think that the case, these skirmishes, which escalated into larger fighting, this wasn't anything unusual. This wasn't anything extraordinary. Something like this happen like once or twice a year, maybe once in 2 years, and it wasn't a big deal. This time, and Azerbaijanis usually, if the fight doesn't go the way they want, they try not to talk about it much. They try not to, popularize it. This time they decided to go international, and it was presented to international community as it was something on a scale of World War. Probably they were trying to check reactions of international community. Probably this probably was something which Russian would call разведка боем, like doing their reconnaissance with the fight.
Reconnaissance in force.
Sorry?
Reconnaissance in force.
Reconnaissance in force, yeah. So probably it was an operation like this. They decided to check what would be the reaction, international reaction, especially after with new authorities in Armenia, especially in the COVID-19 situation in the world. So probably they were checking the waters now. Actually, they also brought the conflict to international level, instigating fights between Armenian and Azerbaijani communities worldwide. First of all, in Russia, especially in Moscow, but in other countries too. Azerbaijan has been building a network of, I wouldn't call it just communities, because it also heavily relies on criminal elements. It heavily relies on in Russia, at least in Russia. Yeah, okay. Yes, that was part of their politics too. So, yeah. So I guess they were doing a reconnaissance in new situation, new world situation, and new situation in Armenia.
Okay. Emil, by our reports, Armenia scored acceptable results in the fighting, but you tweeted your disappointment at the dead drone display this week by the Armenian Defense Forces. What was all that about?
Of course, every time there is fighting, we have to kind of carefully examine the official claims and what is a realistic outcome. What has been the trend is that Armenian side, when it talks about its own casualties, it's fairly honest, especially human casualties. But when it comes to Azerbaijani casualties, there is a lot of exaggeration happening. This happened in April 2016, happened in other incidents, and it happened this time around as well. And it's a natural outcome because these claims are based on field reporting. So if you, for example, if you are a machine gunner and you're shooting at the enemy and the enemy falls down, your perception is that you hit him or at least injured him, but most likely killed him. So that's how it's reported to commanders, and that's how commanders pass that on to their commanders, and that's how it comes out of the press spokesmen. So especially with this UAVs, there is a lot of confusion. What's been shut down? What's been damaged but did not fall down? What fell down as a result of a technical failure, and what fell down as a result of some kind of electronic warfare. So it's normal that there would be confusion. So Armenian Defense Ministry came out and said that they believe they had shot down or brought down 13 UAVs operated by Azerbaijan. So far, I have seen evidence of one UAV that they captured. So that's that Sky Striker drone that either was brought down by electronic warfare or suffered a technical failure and parachuted down. There's been several pictures. Maybe there's more than one Sky Striker drone, perhaps. What that particular tweet was about is that Defense Ministry's press secretary, Shushan Stepanyan, captioned that display that was there as, here's what we have acquired in the last fighting in Tavush. Whereas most of the things that were displayed there were from before that fighting in Tavush, and actually one item was from 2011. And still unclear if it was Azerbaijani or perhaps Israeli drone that Israelis operated at the time in Azerbaijan. So that was my tweet, and I thought it was great that it was picked up and turned into big news in Azerbaijan in that 𝐁𝐸𝐴Z website that is sort of their main Russian language propaganda site. And I thought that was great because they were looking for a way to kind of soften the blow. The biggest blow, of course, in this fighting was the death of their general and some of the other officers. Basically, a substantial portion of the core command, right? The third core command. Especially when they have an Armenian name criticizing Armenian Defense Ministry, that's a big deal for them. Yeah.
Emil, do you think that the numbers were then exaggerated by the Defense Ministry?
I believe so. They're always exaggerated. And they're exaggerated naturally because so the claim is 13 and the evidence is of one actual evidence. There are some parts that may have been, legitimately shot down with some kind of ground fire, and of course it's hard to those remains that they put up in addition to the older aircraft, older UAVs that were previously captured. But we cannot know for sure whether they were actually shot down or they actually detonated on impact. Those strike UAVs. They are used to be their purpose is to blow up, right? So if they detonated on impact, then you can claim that you shot it down, but I mean it's not true. it actually acted on impact. And then there were also claims that some of these parts that they claimed were parts of UAVs, as Karen's website, actually Razminfo, confirmed they were not even UAVs, they were missile parts. Parts of missiles that Azerbaijan fired at the long distance at some of the Armenian targets. And I reviewed their videos that they published on their YouTube page. They fired at least 8 of those missiles. They're called Spike and Loss missiles, which are probably the most expensive individual missile that Azerbaijan has in its inventory. I mean, in addition to maybe LoRa missiles and some of the others that they have used so far. They've used some of them, hit some targets. Some of them, like I said, they hit some cars and things like that made no sense that they would hit a car with the missile like that, right?
Yeah.
Like emergency vehicle. So, but I mean, there is also questions about Armenian military's ability to analyze this information, because we've heard early on by spokesman for the defense ministry Artsakh that Armenian units, that Azerbaijani side used Grad missile launchers, because I think they said that because there were some targets hit more than 10 kilometers away from the front line, and normally when it's more than 10 kilometers it would be a Grad fire or some other missile launcher like that. But in this case they used precision missiles to target those targets more than 10 kilometers from the front line, and most likely they used them off the helicopters, and the Armenian side was not able to detect those launches. So that's a major issue that the Armenian Armenian military would have to deal with forthwith, because it's a standoff weapon, meaning that the helicopters can launch those weapons while they're outside of regular air defense from the Armenian side.
Yes. I have a question for Karen actually on this. So it seems that drones are going to have a permanent role in the future of warfare in the Caucasus. What are the trends here for Armenia, both militarily as well as military technology?
First of all, not only UAVs, but also precision munitions like the NLOS missiles that Emil mentioned. The trends are the same as in the whole world, that we need more UAVs, and it would be better if Armenia starts to produce its own, at least whatever is possible. Not probably something fancy like American Reapers, for example, but at least like smaller UAVs can be produced and are produced, in Armenia.
So there were some reports that we did use Armenian-produced UAVs.
Yes.
How pervasive do you think that was, and what type of UAVs do we use today? That
I wouldn't comment on this because, first of all, I don't have information, and there were no reports in open sources that I could cite. It is said so that Armenian UAVs were used to conduct the operation, to hit that Azerbaijani general, but I'm not. I don't have exact information on this. In any case, this is the face of the modern war, and if you are late for this, you are going to lose. Azerbaijan is investing a lot into precise munitions, including drones. So we have no choice but to go on with our own, and also trying to develop anti-drone measures. I mean, this is where the warfare is heading now, anywhere in the world. So we can't stay. We can't just stand and look at it from the distance.
Aspet Kochikyan, anything you want to add on drone warfare or anything else you've heard so far?
I mean, both Emil and Karen covered it very well in terms of the aftermath of the war. One thing I want to add is about, as Karen rightfully pointed out, the future of warfare being drones is quite interesting. I recently was reading an edited volume titled One Nation Under Drone, the legality, the legal aspect, the moral aspect, and the utility of unmanned drones and so on. And it's quite interesting to see that it's not just one kind of an unmanned vehicle. You can end up having pre-targeted drones, low intensity or low cost drones and like a swarm of bees, you can unleash it on a target. This is what the Yemeni Houthi rebels did in 2019, September 2019, when they attacked oil installations. So it's quite interesting to see as to an evolving warfare, new technology, but in action as well. It's all new game. It's all new. It can be very maneuverable drones, but it can also be sort of low tech, pre-targeted targets, pre-acquired targets. You just release those drones. Of course, it all assumes that you have money. You need to have money to build those, and you can sustain that. But that's what I only wanted to add.
Also, I want to add another interesting detail. It can be considered a weak signal now, but there was an attack on Armenian electricity network website by Azerbaijani hackers, a successful attack. Of course, they didn't get into the control system itself through that website. They were able to hack some databases, get some personal information, etc. But that's probably going to be another dimension of the future possible war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Hackers' attacks on infrastructure.
Can I follow up on that with Karen on the infrastructure? Actually, last summer, there was a major electricity outage in Azerbaijan, remember? With the Mingichaur hydropower station having a fire and whatnot, and they were out in Baku, and the skyscrapers lit up in the Armenian colors, Then I think a year before that, in 2018, in the summer, there was a major outage in Armenia as well.
Yes.
And after
it
that,
was somehow related with Iran, I remember.
I think there was a KGB or an Artsakh, the National Security Service was put in charge of the investigation. I don't remember any outcome of that investigation. Was there any sense that those events were connected, or if there is any kind of warfare happening of that? I mean, now obviously you're saying that there is evidence that they've hacked into the databases, but is there an effort to get into controls and try to cause damage that way?
I haven't heard about any outcomes from an NSS investigation, but it was some unclear press release which really said nothing about the results. But there was lots of conspirologists thinking at that time that it may be a cyber attack, a result of cyber attack that damage. Actually, even if it wasn't the events that you described, we have to expect that. I mean, it's inevitable. This is where the warfare technology is heading, and it's going to happen sooner or later, something like this.
Okay. As the border war quieted down, clashes have broken out in cities around the world between Armenian diaspora communities protesting against Azeri aggression and Azeri or Azerbaijan-supported protesters. In cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, Moscow, Kiev, London, just to name a few, violence broke out between angry demonstrators. In Los Angeles, an Armenian school was vandalized with hate graffiti. In Berlin, a car belonging to the Armenian embassy was set on fire. Karen, we have not seen this sort of follow-up to skirmishes in the past. What is driving this violence by Azeri supporters in cities around the globe?
There were some tensions, for example, after the April War. But in Russia, I remember, they were very quickly rounded up by Russian police. This time, for some reason, it took longer time for them to interfere. And I think it's obvious that at least what happens in Russia, but probably what happens everywhere, is directed right from Azerbaijan. In Russia, Azerbaijan, for the last 2 or 3 years, Azerbaijan has set groups of young people based on local communities who are, well, the logic of the organizations is like of skinhead, probably, or organization or any other street gang. They, for example, follow people, they find people who they say are insulting Azerbaijanis on social networks. They beat them, they threaten them, make them to apologize on videos, and then they post that online, etc., etc. This is something that is not unusual for Russia. For example, some North Caucasian communities do that, but Azerbaijan did this most probably on government level. It was sponsored, it was coordinated by Azerbaijani government. It's actually a tool, political tool that they are trying to use. The second thing, they have Azerbaijan, Baku, official Baku have supported some Azerbaijani, ethnically Azerbaijani criminals in post-Soviet territory in Eastern Europe, in Turkey. And that can be another unofficial tool that they may want to use to conduct their politics. And an example of that probably is you remember Israeli blogger Lapshin, who was kidnapped and sent to Baku several years ago. And after he was let free, and he went to the European Court of Human Rights. He got lots of threats from Azerbaijan, and as he tells in Latvia or Lithuania, he was informed that some criminals, local criminals, Azerbaijani criminals, are after him, so he had to flee the country.
Interesting. Emil, what do you have to add to that? And should we in the diaspora be prepared from now on for violence erupting in our communities when this type of fighting occurs?
Well, I mean, in this case, we have to acknowledge that we saw on video that Armenians attacked first. In Los Angeles, we saw that also in Belgium, where groups of Armenians attacked either smaller groups of Azerbaijanis or individual Azerbaijanis. And of course, that after those videos went out, there was I don't know if we want to call it natural or what, but a reaction by Azerbaijani side. And having that capability that Karen described, both in terms of the organized crime capability and also sort of semi-organized crime, sort of protection racket capability in Russia, because there's a lot of first of all, there's a big Azerbaijani community in Russia, big trade Azerbaijani community in Russia that is once in a while comes under different types of pressures, either from official agencies, police, or the KGB, or from ethnic Russian nationalist groups. So they're prepared to kind of do fighting with either mostly with Russian organized crime. In this case, it was that those groups may have been directed to sort of for the retaliatory attacks on Armenians. But we have to acknowledge that those first attacks happened in Los Angeles and in Belgium. There was also some scuffles in London protests, but nothing like what it was in Los Angeles. So if that is the case, we have to kind of come out and say that organizations that organized the protest at the Azerbaijani consulate in Los Angeles weren't able to control. It's hard to control large groups of people, and I have not seen them come out and say, that they need to make amends of some kind for this. So when you don't have leadership at the community level and you don't have you don't really have leadership at the community level of Azerbaijani community here in U.S. It's mostly coordinated out of the diplomatic organizations, out of the consulate, through networks of either family members of diplomats or through students who get government stipends to study in U.S. or some other connections. When you don't have those sort of community level authority to come together, say, leader of our Azerbaijani community in the United States, I don't know of such a person that I could sort of reach out to beyond sort of lobbyists that work for Azerbaijan. And somebody on the Armenian level, where you do have some organized Armenian community to come out and make a joint call for cessation of hostilities and for normal behavior in the streets, you will probably have a recurrence of this kind of events. From now on, of course, the police and FBI will be on the lookout for any kind of street protests that Armenians try to organize or Azerbaijanis try to organize, and sort of be more reluctant to let them proceed, or when they proceed, will proceed under greater police scrutiny.
Okay. Aspet Kochikyan, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, one of the first things that came to my mind when I was looking at the level of Azerbaijani protesters around the world is a conversation I had about 5-6 years ago in Baku with several young individuals as well as officials in the diplomatic academy. And one of the things they said is that they were sending students to the West to get educated, and even if half of them return or less than half of them return, the remaining ones would become the foundation of a new Azerbaijani community or a new Azerbaijani diaspora. And I couldn't but keep thinking about this, and probably as we're seeing maybe the possibility of a rising new organized, be that not community, but even by the consulate, as Emil pointed out, Azerbaijani sort of community, diasporan community. And also, let's not forget, we talked about this last week, about the international reaction by pro-Azerbaijani statements, how they had already lined up. Aspet Bedrosian mentioned this, that they were already lined up, and the moment the target or the war started, they had all these statements coming out. And it seems that these protests were also, in a way, on the back burner. Yeah. Maybe they had a contingency plan, and they would just, when the time comes in, and say, "This is it."
Okay. Well, there's so much to talk about, but for now, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Armenia Security Council introduced a new national security strategy on July 10, 2020. The previous strategy document was adopted in 2007, in the final year of second President Robert Kocharian's final term in office. Last week we had a conversation with Dr. Karina Avedisyan on this topic.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aspet Kochikyan, and today I have my conversation partner is Karina Avedisyan. Professor Avedisyan teaches Russian and Caucasus politics, as well as issues of democratization, and she has extensive experience also working in security issues. So today's discussion will cover a couple of key points, and welcome, Karina, by the way.
Thank you so much.
It's always glad to have people knowledgeable information and analysis. So today I want to talk about briefly. I want us to discuss briefly about the latest national security doctrine that was issued right before the latest border flare-up, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This was a major upgrade since 2007, so 13 years have passed, and there have been a lot of changes in Armenia, regionally, internationally as well. So what is your first take when you read the two documents, the old one and the new one? What are some of the things that stand out?
Yeah, one of the things that stands out is that in the new national security doctrine, you have the fact that democracy, human rights, and rule of law are specifically named as key elements of effective governance in Armenia and key for Armenia's internal stability. So within that context, obviously, talking about a post-revolutionary Armenia, we're not talking about the same Armenia anymore. after this new national security doctrine. And this isn't the Armenia also of the 4-day war anymore. Armenia has internal legitimacy now. It doesn't suffer from a democratic deficit like Azerbaijan does. And I find it interesting that one of the results of this fact is that you don't see Armenia doing things like, for example, Azerbaijan hosting mega events, right? Like Eurovision or Formula One. Those kinds of things, or placing PR pieces in Western publications, right? Those things start to become sort of an articulation of success when other sources of legitimacy are not there, when they're not there. And Armenia really doesn't need to do that. So we're dealing with a different scenario in which we have a clearly, authoritarian, autocratic government on one side and another sort of, democratic one. So the dynamics have completely changed. And I think the new national doctrine also reflects that. And I think, interestingly, with this new scenario, this more democratic context that we're talking about, it's interesting that Armenia's kind of become more hawkish, particularly under the current Minister of Defense, David Donayan. And this is kind of, where I talk about the, Donayan Doctrine, which is essentially a key aspect of that national security doctrine. But it's kind of a new, giving it a new personality. So we're essentially, in this last flare-up, we've been watching the Donayan Doctrine in action.
Right. Sorry to interrupt, Karina, but when you mentioned that it has become more hawkish, what is the source of this hawkishness? Is it, does it come from being in a position of more comfort? Let's say the idea of being more quote unquote legitimate at home, so that gives them more free reign internationally or regionally?
I think it's a little more simple than that. I think Donoyan is very aware of the regional security environment and the fact that, especially over the last couple of years, there's been increasing clashes on Armenia's international borders, as we've seen in Nakhchivan and obviously most recently in Tavush. And it's this regional security environment in which Donoyan has been seen to, for example, last year when I think he was visiting the US, he kind of, explicitly rejected the territorial concessions framework as something to be worked with. And it seemed that over the years that idea was starting to kind of lose its relevance. But this was the first time that you had such a high-ranking official kind of explicitly say that that's not what we're doing anymore.
And what is the Donoyan Doctrine? Could you sum it up, in a couple of sentences?
Yeah, so I want to give credit, I think, to at least the person I think who came up with the term. I didn't come up with it. I didn't coin it. It's a young scholar, Edward Abrahamian, who I think is doing his PhD in the UK. And I think he came up with it. So it basically describes a more aggressive approach to military security. It's one that moves Armenia from the old doctrine of this sort of static defense towards sort of active deterrence footing. And it seems to be working from a military tactical standpoint. So under this doctrine, we've seen Armenia boost its military capabilities, its assault capabilities, actually. So within the doctrine, essentially, it's that, in a nutshell, if you make war, we will take territory. That's one of the key elements of the doctrine. So, if there is military action from Azerbaijan's side, Armenian armed forces will essentially carry out a counteroffensive and take more territory, as opposed to that static trench defense that we had been seeing before.
Now, David Donoyan has actually been in the Ministry of Defense. He was Deputy Minister of Defense for many, many years. Do you have any evidence, or do you know of any evidence that this is something that is very much person-based, individual-based, meaning this is his worldview, and at some point it wasn't included in the larger doctrine back in the 2017? And now that he's the defense minister, he's been able to actually give it wings and implement.
Yeah, I know that he first floated the idea in 2016, so when he was still Deputy Minister of Defense. And I know that the doctrine has gone through several transformations since then. I'm obviously not privy to, who might have been shaping the doctrine further, but it seems to me, from what I know, to be a bit of a personal project. But what's interesting is that the doctrine also coincides with this unprecedented cooperation that we've been seeing between the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of High-Tech Industry, which alongside other duties also deals with developing the military technology, military industry. And this has been shaped in large part by Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. So these elements kind of coming together have been essentially sort of facilitating the implementation of this doctrine.
Right. So we see two things here. I mean, the constant skirmishes on the border, on the line of contact over the years actually made the Armenian army more prepared. But at the same time, with this new doctrine, we saw a combo that manifested itself in recent days. So what's your assessment in terms of both those realities, let's call it?
If I understand your question correctly, I mean, what we saw just after the escalation, this most recent escalation, which started on July 12th, Armenia took 2 military posts that belong to Azerbaijan. So that's unprecedented, and that's essentially, when I say we've been kind of seeing the Donayan Doctrine in action.
Is that confirmed, Karina? Is that confirmed, the 2 military posts?
I haven't seen it officially confirmed, but from sources in Armenia, that is what is kind of assumed to have happened. That information, by the way, came out when the news came out that the major general, the Azerbaijani general, had been killed. So that news came to me at the same time. But obviously, I would obviously encourage people to wait for the official confirmation of that.
Absolutely.
So, and again, as far as the escalation, I mean, we still don't know how the fighting began. That's still unclear. And I would refrain from speculating about, who started it. But what is clear is that it wasn't a coordinated offensive operation that was planned ahead of time the way that the 4-day war began. So it seems that, there was obviously a element of surprise when the Azerbaijani jeep happened upon the Armenian military post. But from there, we really don't know what happened after that. So it could have, there is a possibility that there was a political rationale for escalating.
On whose side, Karina?
On the Azerbaijan side, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see any strategic benefit for Armenia to escalate, especially, on its international border.
Well, they say at times of war, truth is the first casualty. So in terms of finding out who started the conflict first and so on, it'll be a while, and it would be a lot of hearsay. Now, moving on, when you said the escalation was on the Azerbaijani side, when we followed what was happening in Azerbaijan in terms of the Azerbaijani government sacking the foreign minister, and you had people taking on the streets, funerals turning into protests, anti-Armenian chants, and so on. What's your overall assessment about the Azerbaijani sort of PR sort of offensive, if we can call it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, again, kind of going back to the how much stock Azerbaijan puts into its international reputation in the international arena. I think it's possible to argue that Baku was to some extent succeeding in pushing its version of the clashes, including the assertion that Armenia started it. But three things subsequently happened that changed that narrative, or at least undermined it. The first is the threat of a missile strike on Armenia's Metsamor nuclear plant.
Right.
The second is the rally that occurred in Baku on the 15th. So that's 3 days after the hostilities began, in which upwards of 10,000 people gathered, not just to chant Qarabagh is ours, but also, death to Armenians, and, just to essentially demand war. And this was, as the kids say, not a good look, especially for the side that's essentially complaining about Armenia being the sole aggressor. The third is the bombing of the PPE, factory in Tavush. So again, you have the bombing of a medical mask making factory that was making 300,000 masks a day in the middle of a pandemic. Again, it's just not a good look. And And, it may well be that the factory wasn't sort of targeted on purpose, but it still happened, right? So it seems to me that these three things cost Baku a lot of, this much desired international sort of approval. It did undermine their argument that Armenia is the sole aggressor. So I think those three things, really kind of undermine that narrative.
Thank you, Karina. I think this was quite informative and elucidating in terms of understanding where Armenia stands doctrinally, but also practically in practice, putting that doctrine in action. I thank you for your time, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're joined by our panelists Asbet Kochikyan, Emil Sanamyan, Karen Vertanesyan, and Alen Zamanyan. We heard Karina talk about the national security strategy in the previous segment. The publication of the NSD just before the border flare-up and at the time when Armenia has been articulating a more assertive military doctrine known as the deterrence doctrine, or in some circles, quote-unquote, Donayan Doctrine. Azerbaijan may have been surprised at what appears to have been an aggressive counter-response by Armenia. Karen, are we seeing a resurgent, more assertive Armenia when it comes to war? If so, why now?
I think nothing has changed from the point of view of, being more probably aggressive or assertive, if you wish. The army is an institution that has been built since 1990s, and the process never stopped, which is natural for the army of a country that's been in the state of war for the last, let's say, 30 years, almost 30 years. So I see that's quite normal, the reaction, be that in Tavush or elsewhere, because the fighting in Tavush wasn't the only one for the last 2 years. There were some artillery shootings, some mortar fire, etc., some smaller operations on Nakhchivan frontier. So, I think it's everything like business as usual.
In one of the follow-up interviews recently, Armen Grigoryan, in explaining the new national strategy, took credit for the more assertive stance of Armenia, and I'm using his language, in military confrontation to the doctrine and obviously to the political changes since then. But it seems like, Karen, you're saying that this is just a regular evolution of Armenia's military strategy.
What military did was business as usual. In Tavush and elsewhere. As for the national security strategy, I have lots of questions about this document. It doesn't look like a working strategy document, rather a set of wishes or wishful thinking, if I may say. Just one probably ironical example, what has Armenian cuisine to do in national strategy document, but it's there. Like
Armenian cuisine, you mean?
It's very strange. It says that it's national value. Armenian cuisine is a national value, which is supposedly should be protected from whom, how. If someone gets a wrong recipe for dolma, are we going to deploy, military or what? It's on the third or fourth page of national strategy working document.
Let me say a couple of words about this.
Okay. I have no comments on it.
The national security strategy, obviously, is a totally political thing. So the reason it's published is for the government to say that they have produced a national security strategy, because otherwise the opposition can come out and say, Where is your strategy? You don't have a strategy. You don't even have a national security strategy. And in this case, after it's published, the government will say, what do you mean? We published I don't know how many, 40 pages. You should go and read it. And this was the case before. The previous national security strategy prepared when 𝐻𝐸𝐞𝐞 Nanjan was the head of a national security military affiliated think tank. It was prepared to show that the government is serious about national security and sort of is aware of the security challenges countries facing and is aware of international security environment, at the time dominated still by counterterrorism. So this is what it is. This is a document that is, it's, I don't know, you want to call it a fig leaf or you want to call it, sort of a kind of a poster, but that's what it is. Rarely do national security strategies, and United States government, other governments also produce national security strategies, because if you don't have one, your opposition will say, oh, you're so not serious about national security that you don't even have a national security strategy. They produce them. So that's the extent of it, of the national security strategy. It's substantially divorced from day-to-day concerns and also substantially divorced from likely future concerns. What Donald Rumsfeld liked to say, the known unknowns or the unknown unknowns. The next threats that are happening. So just you look at the national security strategy of the
Donald
United States.
Rumsfeld, you mean?
Yeah, didn't I say Donald Rumsfeld?
You said Donald Trump, I think.
Did I say that? All right, yeah, Rumsfeld, of course. You look at the latest national security strategy, unlikely that the bio hazards were number one threat, and obviously now that's the total preoccupation of the United States government. So that's where we are with this national security strategy and the past national security strategy. It's a political document intended to show that the government is serious about that.
So yeah, I agree, but I think that as a high-level document, it warrants a lot of attention and scrutiny from all parties. So when I was reading the document, one salient point I noticed is that it seems that Armenia is making deliberate effort not to use the term Artsakh Republic or Nagorno-Karabakh Republic in the strategic document. And this is a marked difference from the 2007 version. In explaining this change, Armen Grigoryan simply pointed to Pashinyan's speech in Artsakh on August 5, 2019. That was a speech where, among other things, Pashinyan said, Artsakh is Armenia and that's that. Critics argue that this move de-emphasizes the right of self-determination, one of the key positions held by Armenian sides throughout the last 30 years in negotiations. Emil, what are your thoughts on this change in language?
I think there's a considerable support for sort of formalizing Armenia-Artsakh reunification. We've over the past, in Armenia and in Nagorno-Karabakh in Artsakh. So it's natural that the emphasis would go towards unification and sort of joint action rather than, republic, some sort of ephemeral support for separateness of Artsakh from Armenia. So that kind of emphasis is, I think, is normal. What I have not seen really, I expected much more move in a direction of integration of Artsakh into Republic of Armenia, as promised by Nikol Pashinyan before he was elected prime minister. He said publicly that Artsakh will finally become part of the Republic of Armenia, not just of Armenia as it will already, but of Republic of Armenia. But so far we have not really seen a move in that direction, and as if anything, there may be you could see some steps back in that direction. Typically there would be some kind of Artsakh contingent in the Armenian parliament, for example. Right now, I think there's only one member of parliament. I think it's Hovannes Igityan, who is born in Artsakh, and of course he's lived outside of Artsakh for most of his life, and is not part of sort of the Artsakh community, you could think of. The more of a sort of concrete expression of reunification would be to to bring in Artsakh into Armenia's electoral space and have the elections there to have representatives from Artsakh in the Armenian parliament, just like was the case in the early 90s.
Emil, however, this is exactly the kind of momentous change that a strategy document would be predicting, correct? For example, the fact that Pashinyan may be leading towards one country that includes Artsakh rather than two countries, two republics, is a momentous change in strategy.
It could be a momentous change in strategy, but I think it has to be any change.
At least in negotiations.
In negotiations, yes and no, because for the past how many years? Forever, Armenia has been negotiating for Artsakh. Armenia has been representing Artsakh and has been security guarantor of Artsakh. So that I don't think is a momentous change in that sense. Yes, there has been. There's clearly a separate political system that exists in Artsakh and separate electoral process, but I think it's in the long term it has to come into the political space of Armenia, and you can think of different intermediate steps for that, but one of them is one I mentioned, and there are others. But right now, other than the political, Artsakh is integrated totally with Armenia in terms of economics and security. So it's a matter of time until it's politically integrated. But those steps have to be taken, and they're I think long overdue. And if anything, initially you had much more, and when Armenia was still a Soviet republic, there was much more of a readiness to elect, for example, Robert Kocharyan was elected member of the Armenian Parliament, National Assembly, Supreme Council rather, in 1990, and some of the other Artsakh Armenian leaders were elected members of Armenian Parliament. So it would be a natural expectation.
Alen, let me just ask you that question then next. So what's your take on what you've heard so far? What is the balance between the popular support for reunification, as was mentioned, versus a very delicate legal strategy to support the self-determination of Artsakh, which has been expressed in past referenda, for instance?
Yeah, I think one important thing is that one important reason to keep Armenia and Artsakh as two separate republics is exactly that, that this is a struggle for self-determination for a people living in a independent republic, and it's not a territorial issue for Armenia. It's specifically a self-determination issue for the people of Artsakh, and in the steps that have been taken by this government in the past couple of years, and also in this the doctrine that was recently published, it seems like the status of Artsakh is being lowered more and more. I mean, the first thing that Nikol Pashinyan said when he came to government when he came to power was that Artsakh must participate in the negotiations. That was kind of a vague statement. I mean, a lot of people commended him for it, but it wasn't clear how that was going to be accomplished, and also in what capacity Artsakh was going to participate in the negotiations. And in the past 2 years, I feel like a lot of this has kind of crystallized. For one thing, the Artsakh is Armenia statement, followed by several, at least one instance when the president of Artsakh was referred to as a governor, and several mentions of the Artsakh representative rather than the president of Artsakh again. Overall, just lowering the status of Artsakh. And in parallel, we've seen sort of a seeming rise in the status of this representative of the Azerbaijani community of Karabakh. And it seems like it's not clear what the format of Artsakh's participation would be in the negotiations, but it seems like these two entities are sort of being put on the same platform, on the same level playing field, and that's problematic, I think, from a perspective of negotiations and, like you said, the legal ramifications of that. The other thing that I wanted to mention, the other thing I wanted to mention about this is that having Artsakh as a separate entity and having, let's say, the Armenian leadership negotiate, there's always that fallback mechanism, which is something that I've always heard, that the Armenian side is negotiating, and at some point there's always we have to consult with our partners in Artsakh, and we can't make a decision on our own. And we've seen this kind of come up over the years, and unifying the two and saying there's only one front and we negotiate on behalf of Artsakh kind of takes away that last playing card that we have, and tactically it seems problematic.
Karen, I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well.
Actually, there have been some concerns about the change of wording in negotiations documents. For example, as was already mentioned, the problem of elected representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh, not the authorities of Nagorno-Karabakh, but elected representative. And actually, in a matter of months, the leader of the so-called Azerbaijani community of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is actually an NGO in Azerbaijan, with some people involved who weren't born in Karabakh, who has nothing to do with Karabakh. For example, there's a ethnical Russian who is now part of that NGO, but the leader of that NGO became elected to Milli Mejlis, the parliament of Azerbaijan, and he now calls himself an elected representative of Nagorno-Karabakh. He was elected from Karabakh because now in Azerbaijan they maintain all the administrative structure of what they imagine as be Karabakh. For example, they have chief of the hospital of Shushi who even gets salary for that, who is paid for being the doctor of hospital that doesn't exist. There are local authorities for different regions of Karabakh, etc. So now the guy presents himself as an elected representative of Nagorno-Karabakh. He meets ambassadors. He meets ambassadors of Minsk group countries. He already had meetings with ambassador of France, with Minsk group co-chairs, etc., etc. So, I mean, they are trying to add more weight to that structure and to present that structure as something equal to authorities of Karabakh, which has been democratically elected.
Okay, we have very little time. Does anyone want to shout out last minute comments and we can close it?
Hovig, the document, this is Asbet Bedrosian, the document comes across more like a value statement than a strategy document. To me, it talks, for example, about religion. It talks about language, even cuisine. It doesn't necessarily specify which recipe we should be using, but it doesn't also tell us enough about how we are going to be achieving some of the ahead of us. For example, it leaves a lot fuzzy as far as strategies about the projects and initiatives that need to be taken. It doesn't give them a framework, and therefore leaves a lot towards the tactics of any kind of current government going forward. And I would be for that kind of a framework from a strategy successful.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. It was a nice discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And that concludes Groong Week in Review. Thanks for listening to us, and we'd appreciate your feedback. You can contact us on the web at groong.org or our Facebook page by searching for ANN Groong. That's Groong.